Chapter 0, Captured. It's skywriting now for the rest of the book. I'm using dark red ink because this part has some blood in it, so you need to imagine my words scrawled in red across the creamy parchment of the scrapbook I'm writing in. Don't see the black type on your page or the colours on your computer screen. See the blood red of the ink I'm using. As Minnow said, we were playing the time again game when Six came in screaming. Before we could do anything, we were surrounded by Dezgul. Real Dezgul. Some crawled out through the screen, slobbering from their dirty mouths and leering at us with their gluggy eyes. Others stormed through the church and crowded around us, making snorting noises as they sized us up. Before that moment, I'd never known what it feels like to be hunted by a vicious animal. It's the worst. The Dezgul were huge, with the head and legs of a bull and the torso and arms of a human. Their tongues were as big as a snake and their mouths stunk of rotten flesh. I thought I was going to vomit from the stench, but before I could, one of the Dezgul threw back its head and roared as it thrust a red-hot spear into Blizzard's arm, burning straight through his shirt, causing his flesh to spit and bubble. I felt numb and as if part of me was going to splinter. I wondered how many more little selves could slip away from my body before there wouldn't be anything left of me. Since Six and Jem had splintered, I'd felt like a ghost. Now, with the terror of the monsters all around me, I felt like fog or smoke, and frightened beyond anything I can describe. I knew I had to think fast, but I couldn't. The Dezgul were furious. Their manes were all matted with sweat, and froth was coming from their nostrils as they bellowed and roared. Six shot up to the top of the church's ceiling, screaming. As she sped out of the room, she shouted, "I'll get help!" One of the Dezgul fired an arrow at her, but it missed. I felt like my heart was going to explode with terror. Two gigantic hands were suddenly around my neck, and I was yanked up into the air. I tried to scream, but my throat was shut, and I couldn't breathe. Everything went red, and all I could see was the face of a Dezgul leering at me with its filthy eyes. Then its long forked tongue darted from its mouth and slapped me. It stung like 1,000 wasps. I kicked the beast, but it growled and bared its teeth before its tongue hit me again. I could no longer think. I was frozen to the spot. To my horror, I felt a part of me splinter away. There I was at the age of 5, hovering in midair, my face a deathly white. But when another Dezgul charged towards that part of me, my 5-year-old self merged back into my body. Minnow was running to help me, shouting my name, but one of the creatures belted her out of the way. The hands around my neck squeezed hard. I thought I was going to die, but suddenly the Dezgul threw me onto its back. I let out a blood-curdling scream. "Ben!" I yelled, holding out my hand, but it was too late. The creature held me firmly as both of us morphed into steam and glided through the plasma screen down into the murky tunnels of the Time Again game. Too dazed to call out anymore, I stayed silent. Pain shot through my head, and I was sure I wouldn't survive. The Dezgul moved me fully onto its back and stormed through the tunnels, sometimes running on 2 feet and other times on all 4s. The first tunnel was glowing with dark red and brown. Somehow it reminded me of blood and guts. The next one was green and filled with the most horrific screams. After that, we entered an eerie blue tunnel. Booby traps, I thought, remembering Frank's warnings. There was a loud explosion further back in the tunnel. I cringed, expecting to be blown up at any moment. Every so often the Dezgul would slow down and let out a fiendish roar. I couldn't believe what was happening. It was like the worst nightmare I'd ever had, except I was awake. 3 ghosts rose up and shrieked at us, but the Dezgul simply roared at them and kept going. I passed out for a while, but the bumping woke me up. After being lugged past stinking crypts and graves, the Dezgul finally thundered down a dark tunnel before throwing me into a dungeon and slamming the rusty gates. I lay in agony, pretending to be unconscious, hoping that the filthy creature would leave me alone. I ached for it to go away. For a while it jabbered to itself in snorts and grunts. Then I heard its footsteps disappear back along the tunnel. Left in silence, I ran my fingers through my hair and found it all warm and wet. My head was bleeding, I could tell. With shaking hands, I tore off my shirt and ripped it into shreds, tying the strips around my head. I knew that people could die quickly from head injuries. I felt so afraid, but I had to focus. Left only in my t-shirt, I was freezing and started to shiver. I rubbed my arms to try and stay warm, but I could feel my energy leaving me, along with my hope. It was really dark, so I listened as hard as I could to see if I could hear anything. What would happen next? I couldn't bear to think about it. Where were the others? What if the dungeon flooded? Where were Six and Jem? I was filled with terror and tried to block my thoughts. They were too terrible. As I lay there in agony, I concentrated on holding the bits of my shirt onto my head, trying to stop the bleeding. I hoped over and over that I was inside the game somehow. I hoped over and over that if I was inside the game, somehow someone had followed me. But was I inside the game? I remembered going in through the plasma screen, but how could that be? I wondered if Frank and Minnow could change the programming back in the church and rescue me, or if not, perhaps Frank's gaming character could help me. I loved the Frankster. Maybe he could burst through the wall of the dungeon and save me. Or Minnow's character. I didn't even know her name. Oh, what did it matter? I felt as if I'd die for sure. For what seemed like hours, I lapsed in and out of consciousness, willing Ben, Frank or Minnow, or their characters, to come and find me.